Welcome to Group 3 of my battery testing. I got a bunch of batteries here from Luminaire, 1300, 1800, 1000, high volt, graphene, you name it. The SMC Extreme 1400 is here, and I do a little bit of something different with this one. You're not going to want to miss this. Tattoo R-Line 1300 graphene. Does it do it well in my testing, as it does on Facebook? New vendors Hobby Wireless and Ready Made RC Orange series make their first appearance in my testing. We've got the Mad Dog 1500 high volt and the Infinity 1500 graphene from Banggood. Does this battery live up to its hype? You're going to find out. Keep watching. For those of you who aren't familiar with my methodology, I'm not going to spend, I know this will surprise you, I'm not going to spend the next 5 or 7 minutes describing my methodology in depth. You can go ahead and watch the Group 1 videos where I go into a lot of detail as to why I've developed the methodology that I've developed and why I think it's a good thing. But essentially there are 2 tests that I've done in this round of testing. And one is a 20 amp discharge to 14 volts. And the idea is that that's going to represent a relatively low discharge. Just kind of see if the battery specifications are basically honest. So we will take a look at how many milliamp hours the battery delivered and what percent that is of its rated capacity. Now, most of us are probably going to be discharging our batteries at a higher rate than 20 amps. Maybe on average we'll be close to 20 amps, but most of us are probably higher than 20 amps even on average. So this is not intended to represent necessarily your actual flight experience. It's just intended to sort of give the batteries kind of a warm-up lap where they're jogging through and see how they do. And we can see here that most of these batteries delivered about 85%, let's say 80 to 85%. Of their rated milliamp hour percent. There are some exceptions, such as the Luminaire 1300 LiPo that delivered 89%. Some of them get up to 86, 87, 87. The real standout here is the Mad Dog 1500, which delivered 95% of its rated milliamp hour percent. If you look down this list, many of these batteries are in, say, the mid 80s, some of them the low 80s. And so we could say, okay, the industry standard for a milliamp hour rating, at least under my test protocol, is that the battery delivers about 80-85% of its rated capacity. And so we can see that the only one of the batteries in Group 3 that really did that. Stop, don't, that's my mic stand. They can hear that. They can hear you rubbing it. You know who's going to rub you? They'll rub you, the coyotes. The coyotes are going to give you scritches. Go outside. It's ridiculous. So we can see that in the Group 3 testing, most of the batteries were kind of par for the course. The real exceptions here in Group 3, the Luminaire 1300 high volt delivered 93% of its rated capacity. The Mad Dog 1500 high volt delivered 95% of its rated capacity. The Luminaire 1300 LiPo did pretty good at 89%, and so on. The other number that I've added to the testing, and I didn't do this in Groups 1 and 2, but I've gone ahead, and if you want to check this spreadsheet, and by the way, there's a link to this spreadsheet down in the video description, so you can open it up in your copy of Excel, and you can dig around in it and do whatever kind of analysis you want to do. But the other thing I didn't do for Groups 1 and 2 that I've added now is grams per watt hour. So we typically think about battery capacity in terms of amps, but amps actually don't do work. Watts do work. So a battery that delivered, 60 amps at 5 volts wouldn't make you fly very fast. And a battery that delivered 10 amps at 60 volts would get you going, right? So watts is really the metric that you care about when you're measuring a battery's capacity to do work, to make your copter fly fast, punch out hard, etc., etc. But the heavier a battery is, of course, the less performance you get. So a battery with lower grams per watt hour means you are carrying less weight to get the same amount of work out of the battery. So in other words, in this column, lower means the bat is better, and the means the battery has more energy density. And when we take a look at that here in the 20 amp column, we can see that a few of the batteries are down in the 8s, like the Infinity 1500 graphene is relatively energy dense. Whereas if we look at something like the Luminaire 1000 graphene, comes in at 11 grams per watt hour, not terribly energy dense. Now that's not really an apples to apples comparison, a 1000 to a 1500. But in theory, a 1000 milliamp hour battery could have the same energy density, even though it delivers fewer watt hours, right? So in this case, you're getting less grams per watt hour. It's not that you're getting fewer watt hours. the density and the sort of the efficiency of the battery is worse. Let's go ahead now and take a look at the 60 amp testing. And for me, the 60 amp testing, that's like, I mean, that's where the tires are spinning and the rubber is burning, and we really find out which batteries can perform. In the 60 amp testing, the first thing that I look at is the longest burst that the battery delivered. In other words, I hit the battery with 60 amps and I wait till it sags to 14 volts. And when it sags to 14 volts, I stop and I let it recover. And usually it's recovered to, sometimes it's recovered to over 16 volts, just depending on how much sag it gets. So then I do it again and again and again until it rests at 15 volts. Okay. A battery that delivers its discharge in fewer bursts then is a better battery. For example, this Luminaire 1800 did something that no other battery in my testing has ever done before, and that is it delivered 60 amps from full charge down to 15 volts resting, or 14 volts under load, in one burst. In other words, for 86 seconds, it held 60 amps without stopping, delivering 1,289 milliamp hours, or 72% of its rated capacity. And that's really exceptional. That is, and I've tested a fair few batteries, you can see. That's really exceptional. This is an exceptional, exceptional battery. And if we look at the other 1800s in the testing, all of the 1800s I've tested, even the Nanotech 1800, which is not a high volt or a graphene, have done really well. And it really speaks to the advantage that the larger cells give in the ability to deliver amps without sagging and without overheating. Again, if we look at the heat of this battery, what was it? It was 123 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the middle of the road. I would say anything between about 115 to 120 is a good result for the 60 amp test. Anything between about 120 and 125 it's a little warm, but it's acceptable. And anything in, say, the 130s that's like questionable and it's pretty hot. So the fact that this battery did what it did, and it did it while only getting to 123 amps, just extraordinary. This is a heck of a battery. If we look at the number of bursts and the length of the bursts, we can go down this list and look for other batteries that had a low number of bursts. And again, those are going to be good batteries. Those are batteries that had less sag and delivered their current in more sustained bursts instead of a lot of little sips. So the Luminaire 1300 high volt, 4 bursts, longest burst 51 seconds. Very good. That's a heck of a burst. You're not really going to be pulling 60 amps for 51 seconds in real life. So this battery can take whatever you really dish out and keep coming back for more. The SMC Extreme 1400 lipo. This is a standard lipo, not a high volt or a graphene. 4 bursts, longest burst 44 seconds. I had some email exchanges with Danny from SMC and talked to him about why he is not doing high volts or graphenes. And he said, I can just summarize what he said, was that he doesn't think the quality of high volt and graphene cells is up to his standards yet. He's waiting for the technology to get better. And he feels like a very high quality standard lipo cell can be as good or better than what we're seeing from high volts and graphenes today. He's also concerned about longevity. So we can see here, if you just go down this list, that there are some high volt and graphene batteries that beat the SMC Extreme in many respects. But his concern there is that they'll beat it for the first, say, I'm just making up this number, 25 discharges or maybe 50 discharges, and then they won't be any good after that, whereas he hopes that his batteries will be able to deliver performance over time, and that's what he feels he's giving to you. This is something that's come up since my Group 2 testing. The Reeve Electrics 1500 Blend 435 silver label, yada, 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 that battery did amazingly in my Group 2 testing. And since then, I've heard people say, and this is just hearsay, so take it with a grain of salt, but what am I for if not to pass on hearsay? Because I hear a lot of things. And one of the things I've heard is that there are some hardcore racers who got those Revo batteries and they got about 50 cycles out of them and they puffed and they were just useless. So it may be the case I don't know if it is the case, but it may be the case that those Revos are really, really great batteries, but only for like the first 50 cycles and then they're done. And if you're a pro racer, maybe that's what you want. But if you're the average flyer who's looking for something that can last and last and last and make the most for your dollar, maybe a battery like that isn't the best choice, and maybe something like the SMC Extreme is. The Tattoo R line, getting a lot of attention on social media and Facebook. It did not do an exceptionally good job in this testing. I consider an exceptionally good job in this testing to be any single burst over, let's say, 10 seconds. Now, this battery did an 8-second burst. Now, that is completely respectable, and anybody who's flying this battery absolutely see why they're happy with it. But for people who are feeling like the R-Line battery is just like this amazing, earth-shatteringly best battery ever, the test results that I've got don't really stand that out. So we can see that the total discharge time was 56 seconds and there were 10 bursts. And if I just scroll through the list looking for another battery with a similar, what else have we got here? 51 seconds and 12 bursts for the Tattoo 1300. That's pretty close. So you can see, I won't take you through it, but we could go through this list and find many other batteries that had similar performance, many batteries that had worse performance. This is a fine battery, but it doesn't strike me as like an earth-shattering battery like some people are talking about it. How did the Dynegy do? The Dynegy did not great. Okay, not great. 6-second burst, 15 bursts total. That's okay. But that, again, doesn't strike me, by my standards and my test protocols, as an exceptionally good battery. The price on the Dynegy, $31. It's pretty reasonably priced for a middle-of-the-road battery, whereas if you look at the Tattoo R-Line at $38, it's a little less reasonably priced, and perhaps for like an almost $40 battery, you would like to see a little more exceptional performance out of it. For example, can we find a battery that's priced similar that beats it? Well, let's see. Here's the Luminaire 1300 high volt for $35, which did a 51-second burst. Now you say, okay, but I don't want a high volt. I don't like to race high volts. Well, then let's go ahead. Let's skip the Hobby Wireless for a second, and let's look at the Infinity 1500 graphene. Now that is a $25 battery. $25 battery. That is $13. I'm not good at math. $13 cheaper than the Tattoo R-Line. It delivered a 28-second burst. That's pretty good. How about watt hours delivered? 13.4 watt hours for the Infinity versus the Tattoo R-Line. 11.9 watt hours. Significantly fewer watt hours for the Tattoo R-Line. Now that's the R-Line is a 1300, whereas the Infinity is a 1500. So how about weight? The Infinity is 165 grams. The Tattoo R-Line is 164 grams. They're basically the same weight. So the Infinity, for $13 cheaper, delivers less sag under load, more watt hours, better energy density, and so it's just, there you go. It's a better battery. It's a good battery. How about the Hobby Wireless batteries? The Hobby Wireless LiPo at only $20 held a burst for 6 seconds, had 19 total bursts. That's not great. That's a lot of little sips instead of big gulps from the battery. Delivered 67% of its rated capacity, perfectly respectable, and 12.3 watt hours. So for $20, I think you could probably do worse. But let's take a look through and see if there's any other $20 batteries that we might like better. Here is a Dynegy 1300. No, that one did terribly in my testing. Never mind. Here is a $25 SMC. What about the? Yeah, no. I don't see really any other $20 batteries in there. So let's just say that this is the best $20 battery I've ever tested. Hobby Wireless. Here's the graphene one. The graphene one, we would hope to see it do a little better. It did a 9-second burst and a total of 14 bursts. So it did a little better, and at a price of $27, I'm sorry to say that you should just go buy the Infinity, because the Infinity is $2 cheaper and it's way better. The Infinity is really thrown off the curve for everybody else in this test. It did shockingly well. And don't think that it was cherry-picked either, because they knew I was going to test it. This was ordered by a viewer of mine off of Banggood, and it was just shipped to me. So this is just an average battery picked out of the pack. It did really freaking well, and it's a shame. It's really thrown off the curve for just about everybody else in the whole test. Luminaire 1300, longest burst 6 seconds. 22 bursts. Now that's a standard LiPo, and I only included it in here as a comparison to the other Luminaire batteries in the test, like the Luminaire 1300 high volt, which had a much, much longer longest burst. Let me just say for a minute a criticism of my test protocol here. Of course, the high volt batteries will do better for the longest burst because we're discharging to 14 volts. And since they start at a higher voltage, they will take longer to discharge to 14 volts than batteries that start at a lower voltage. And that brings me to a very interesting test that I did. Danny from SMC is the only vendor I've talked to who was willing to go on record and say that people are overcharging his batteries, even though they're not labeled as high volts and they're not a high volt chemistry specifically. And he says that for liability, and put this in big letters up on the screen, for liability reasons, neither SMC nor myself recommend that you do this. And in fact, if you do this, you will reduce the lifespan of your battery. Okay, that's actually straight from the manufacturer's mouth. But people are overcharging the SMC Extreme 1400 to high volt voltages and getting better results out of it. So I did it. And let's see what the results were. So these two lines on my spreadsheet are the exact same battery. I've just labeled this one as a high volt, but it's not a high volt chemistry. It's just the standard SMC Extreme LiPo. I put it on the charger, charged it to 4.3 volts, burst into flames, burned my house down, killed my dog. No, it didn't do any of that. It was fine. And what we see is it is the second battery in my testing to ever deliver its full capacity in one single burst. It delivered a 74-second burst. Now that is not as good as the 86 seconds that I got from the Luminaire 1800 high volt, but considering that it is only a 1400 rated battery, that's pretty freaking respectable. And it delivered 1,099 milliamp hours compared to 1,289 for the Luminaire 1800, 79% of its rated capacity. Very respectable. It delivered 15.9 watt hours, and its grams per watt hour is 10.4, almost the same as the 1800 high volt. So what this test seems to show is that if you have a very high quality standard LiPo, and the SMC Extreme 1400 is a high quality standard LiPo, and you overcharge it to high volt temperatures, you can get high volt like performance. And so maybe it is the overcharge that's making the difference. Maybe there's nothing magical about the high volt chemistry. I really don't know. And in fact, this is certainly something that people have accused manufacturers of doing. Simply taking very high quality standard LiPos, labeling them as high volts and selling them. There is such a thing as a separate high volt chemistry with a higher nominal voltage, but there's really no way for you to know what you're getting. And in fact, in this case, the performance of the battery it's on par or better than any of the labeled high volts here. So now you will all go out and do this with your batteries, and one of you will burn your house down, and I don't want to be responsible for that. You will kill your batteries sooner, and potentially, depending on the quality of the cells, how well balanced they are, etc., you will increase your risk of having a catastrophic battery failure. So don't do this. What about the Ready-Made RC orange batteries? I remember when Ready-Made RC sent out the advertisement that they were going to have their new house line, and they had very, very glowing things to say about their batteries. But the test tells the results. And the test says that the 1800 battery delivered a 62-second burst, and it dumped its entire capacity, by my standards, down to 14 volts in 3 bursts. That is a very, very respectable result, and it is on par, though, with the other 1800s. So basically what we see here is that all 1800s are pretty good, at least all the ones I've tested. All the 800s can sort of do 60 amps without struggling too much. And that's a takeaway that you should consider. If you are going to be racing and you're going to be peaking at 60 or 80 amps for a fraction of a second or a second at a time, but generally you're going to be closer to 35 or 40 amps, then you don't need an 1800. But if you're going to be running a really, really high discharge copter like a tri-blade 6-inch props, or you're going for some kind of a speed record, and you're going to be pulling like 60 or 70 or 80 amps for a sustained period of time, then an 1800 should be seriously on your radar, and you should really be thinking about whether you can afford the additional weight. And the 1800s do come in closer to 200 grams, so an 1800 is easily going to be at least 30 and maybe 50 grams heavier than a 1300, okay? So, I mean, the weight is there. But the ability to deliver amps for an 1800 is just so far and away. Even the standard LiPo 1800, the Turnigy Nanotech 1800, which is not a particularly like impressive 1800, it just beat the pants off the 1300s, even the very, very good ones. Okay, so that's what we can take from this testing about 1800s. The 1500 had a 9-second burst, 14 total bursts, respectable sort of high middle, if you will, but not like exceptional where we start to see these 20 or 30-second bursts, which some of these other batteries do. And at a price of $28, well, again, damn you, Infinity Graphene, for throwing off the curve. At a price of $28, you should just go buy the Infinity Graphene. Basically, any of these batteries that are over $25 that don't beat the pants off the Infinity Graphene, then you should just think about why you're not buying the Infinity Graphene. And that's, sorry, my apologies to all the vendors who have these great batteries who sent them in. This no-name battery out of China, they at least today, they got some secret sauce. Part of the problem with that battery is that, who is Infinity? I don't know. You don't know. When you buy a battery from a brand like Luminaire or SMC or Tattoo or Dynegy or heck, even Hobby Wireless, who is relatively new to the game, at least new to my radar, you're buying from somebody who is, their reputation is on the line. And if Luminaire starts putting out cruddy batteries, you can trust on some level. The Luminaire batteries have done very good in all of my testing. SMC has a reputation, for putting out good batteries. So they're going to make sure that if they get cruddy batteries from China, they're not going to sell them to you, right? They have a reputation to stick up for. We've all seen it happen where the first generation or maybe the second generation of some Chinese product is very, very good and sells like hotcakes and it sells out. And then when demand goes up, the next run has all these defects and is lower quality. I remember seeing that with Sunny Sky motors. Sunny Sky motors, for the venerable Sunny Sky 2204 2300 kV, very, very good motor. One of the best mini quad motors back in the day. And when they got really popular, then all these clones started coming out, or the QC at the factory went down and they started throwing magnets and just being worse and worse. And with a battery, you don't know what's in there. So what I predict will happen is that after this video comes out, Infinity Graphenes will become impossible to find. They'll sell out everywhere because they're legitimately very, very good. And perhaps 2 months from now, when people are buying Infinity Graphenes, maybe they won't be as good. And I'm not saying that will happen, but this is certainly one of the things that you get when you buy from a vendor like Luminaire or SMC, Tattoo, Dynegy, etc. You know that if they're good today, they're probably going to be good tomorrow and the day after because they have a reputation to stand on. So there's my little plug for those vendors, even though perhaps in this testing, the Infinity is really kicking their butts, especially dollar for dollar. All right, well, that's my exciting tour through this spreadsheet. You can look at the spreadsheet yourself and do any kind of analysis you want to do by going to the link down in the video description. And I will be working on a meta-analysis of this data, all this data, to start trying to give you some graphs and charts and help you see which batteries are really standing out, in what ways they stand out, and help us draw some conclusions about high volts, graphenes, etc. All these questions, interesting questions I'm going to be working on, coming up with a way to answer some of those, and you'll see that in an upcoming video. For now, happy flying.